Is it on? Yes? Yes? Oh, there we go. Good morning. How y'all doing today? Good. Oh, you could do better than that. Good morning. How are you doing today? That's much better. There was an espresso bar downstairs, so you have no excuse, okay? Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Saron. I flew all the way from San Diego, California, very warm and sunny San Diego. I was on a plane for 10 hours to spend time with you all. That's how special you are, okay? Although I will admit, London's kind of an awesome place to be, so maybe I did it a little bit for myself too. So thank you all so much. So my talk is called On-Ramps and the Web of the Future. And I would love to hear what you all think of this talk. So please feel free to give me some feedback, some comments, thoughts, opinions, all that stuff. That's my Twitter handle. It's just my first name, last name. It'll be on every slide. Feel free to tweet at me, send me some DMs. My DMs are open. Although I will say that at this point, I'm only accepting compliments on this talk. So just be aware of that. Just be mindful of that. So we're going to focus a lot of this talk on that first term right there, the on-ramps part. One of my best friends, Nadia Adenayo, is British. She was born and raised in London, and she told me that on-ramps isn't really a word that's used very much in these parts, I understand. But that's okay. I'm here. We're going to explore it. We're going to unpack it together. And in order to really dig into this concept of on-ramps, I need to tell you a little bit about my childhood. So, I'm Ethiopian. Shout out to Ethiopia. Yeah. Do you know that we just got our first female president? Yes, we did. Doing big things. Amen. Very, very proud of that. Thank you very much. It was entirely my doing. But I was born in Ethiopia, came to the United States when I was almost 3 years old. It was me, my mommy, and my daddy. And when we came to the U.S., I was raised in a very traditional, very stereotypical immigrant household. My father was a disciplinarian. He was very strict. He believed in education and, well, actually, that was it. He just believed in education. That was the whole thing. He believed that if you went to school and got good grades, and as we all know, the only good grade is an A+, and you went to a really good college, which was mostly Harvard. He didn't know about Oxford at the time, I'm sorry. And you picked a respectable career, and the only respectable career, of course, is being a doctor, then you would live not necessarily a happy life, but you'd be successful, and that's the most important thing. And so anything that distracted from his very specific life plan for me was unacceptable. Having friends over for fun? How will you get good grades if you're having fun? Absolutely inappropriate. Going to people's houses for sleepovers, where they're probably not doing math homework? Absolutely unacceptable. Going to the mall, where there could be boys, the ultimate distraction? No way. So let's just say I didn't really get out much when I was a kid. In fact, the people I spent the most time with, the community that I knew, was the Ethiopian immigrant community. Frankly, people who looked a lot like us. And if you think about immigrant communities in general, they tend to be a more vulnerable population, a more vulnerable group of people. These are folks who came from a country they know very, very well, to a place that they probably know nothing about. They usually have to learn a new language, they have to learn new cultural norms, they have to start careers over again, because those degrees do not always transfer. They have to find a new community, a new place to belong. And that transition is really, really hard. In fact, if you think about that big journey between that old world and that new world, it's terrifying. But people do it all the time. And they do it because they believe that this new world has opportunities that'll make their lives better and bigger and stronger and more exciting. They'll be able to provide for their families better than the place where they came from. But in order to do that, they need on-ramps. We like to think that if those resources and opportunities and jobs exist, that is enough. But if you think about it, plenty of people live or work in the same buildings as millionaires, very successful people, and don't have access to their bank accounts, right? So just because the money's there, the jobs are there, the resources are there, doesn't mean that this immigrant community can tap into it. They need some help. And the on-ramp that they found at least for my community, was in my mom's living room. And my mom was kind of the on-ramp builder. That's me and my mommy. Aren't we adorable? Aren't we just so cute? Oh, I love this photo so much. I don't think she knows that I'm using this photo and putting it in all my talks. But that's my mommy. And that living room that she created was this magical, beautiful place where all these folks could come together and help each other. And at the time, when I was a kid, I kind of took this for granted. I figured, okay, fine, people love to hang out at our house. Our house was always the place to be. From when I was a kid to even now, when I go back to the East Coast to visit family, that's always where they tend to gather. And as a kid, I didn't really appreciate that. I thought, well, my mom's a nice lady. She cooks good food. Our living room has comfortable couches, so why wouldn't you want to hang out with us? But if I look at that through the lens of an adult, it's actually very interesting. Because there were plenty of people in our community who had bigger living rooms, who had people who could also cook very well, who had more money, more resources than we did. So why did people keep coming back to our living room? What made our living room so special? There were a few things. Did you see that coming? There were going to be a few things that made it special? Okay. So we're going to talk about this idea of a living room on-ramp. What does that look like? There are a couple things that my mom did that now I see was very intentional. Back then, I didn't really appreciate, and I want to walk through them with you. The first is she had this principle, I don't even know if she realizes she has this principle, of first to serve and last to eat. She was the one running around, making sure your plates were full, your cups were full, that you were happy and full. Just being full is very important in my culture. And she would be running around and making sure that happened, and she rarely took a break. And in doing so, she made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. She made you feel like your needs mattered. And in that community, that vulnerable community where you're in this new place and you don't always feel like you belong and you don't know if people even care about you, even want you there, that feeling is so important. The second thing she did was she led by observing. She wasn't the kind of host to, clink the champagne glass and make a big fancy announcement. That wasn't really her thing. She'd quietly look around, make sure everything was going well. And if she spotted a problem, she'd run and solve it. But she wouldn't make a fuss about it. She'd look at your plate and she'd see that you didn't actually eat one of your dishes. And she'd come up to you and she'd say, "Why didn't you eat that?" And you'll go, "Oh, it's too spicy. I don't really do heat very well." And she'd go, "Okay." And the next time you came over, she'd make a little row of dishes just for you. And they'd be the non-spicy versions of what everyone else ate. It wouldn't be a big deal. She wouldn't make a big fuss about it. But she'd call you over and she'd say, "You see those? Those are for you." Because your problems mattered to her. Even if it took her an extra hour or two to whip up the same dishes, just a different variety, she would do it. And she would do it because she watched. She took a step back, she watched, she observed, and she responded. The last thing that she did that I really appreciate is she would solve these little problems, these many little problems. And my favorite example of this was a few years ago on Thanksgiving. Now, I don't know how much y'all know about Thanksgiving and American Thanksgiving and what that's all about, but we have turkey and mashed potatoes and mac and cheese, and that's a very American thing. In Ethiopian cuisine, that's not really what we eat. We do a lot of stews and mostly actually vegan dishes. And so this one Thanksgiving, though, we had a lot of that traditional food, mostly for the kids, and we forgot the gravy. Okay, you all need to be a little bit more panicked about this, okay? We forgot the gravy. You can't have Thanksgiving without gravy. And I said to my mom, I said, "Oh my goodness, Mom, we forgot the gravy. What are we gonna do?" And I'm thinking, are the grocery stores even open at this point? Are we gonna have to go to the gas station and get gas station gravy? Oh, that's the worst kind of gravy. What are we gonna do? And she says, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out." And while everyone's standing, watching her, surrounding her in the kitchen, she grabs some flour and some spices and some turkey juice. Is that how you make gravy? I wasn't really paying attention to the recipe. And she whips together the most delicious gravy you've ever had. And this may not seem like a big deal to you, but we don't do gravy. We don't do flour, spice, chicken juice sauces. Like, that's not our thing. Our sauces are made with a lot of onions and a lot of spices. So the idea that this Ethiopian immigrant woman figured out how to make gravy out of nowhere while everyone is watching on Thanksgiving was this amazing little way of her finding a problem, seeing a problem, and just getting to work, rolling up her sleeves and figuring it out. And in doing so, she saved Thanksgiving. So if we abstract the steps involved in some of the examples that I gave, we will begin to see a little bit of a loop. She does this thing where she understands her community. She knows what we need. She builds something, whether it's turkey juice gravy or whatever it may be. She learns, she takes a step back, she observes, and then she sees that there's something not quite right, and then she iterates. She addresses it. Do these steps look familiar? You're all tech people, so I really hope they look familiar. Right? These are like steps involved in product development. She basically does product development, but for people and humans and communities. But it's the same type of steps. But in the beginning, I told you that this talk was going to be about on-ramp. So how is this an on-ramp? How is this idea that creating spaces where you feel safe and welcome and wanted, how is that an on-ramp? It's only when you're in this environment, it's only when you're in this place where you feel safe and welcome and wanted, that you're comfortable asking questions, where you're comfortable raising your hand and saying, hey, I need a job, and I don't really have many skills. Could you help me out? It's only when you feel safe and welcome and wanted that you raise your hand and go, oh, I have a job, I have a connection, I have a resource for you. It's only then when you say, man, I'm struggling with this problem, I don't know how to fix it, can you help me? You need these environments, these living rooms, these places, because that's where those connections happen. That's where those resources that seem oftentimes locked away and inaccessible, that's when you can get to them. Because communities are on-ramps. A lot of the ways we get to those opportunities, we get those jobs, we solve our problems, we move forward in our careers and our lives, a lot of those events, those interactions happen in communities. Communities are essential in unlocking the opportunities that exist. Fast forward a few years later, I am now an adult. I am all grown up. And I've decided that I want to learn to code. And for me, learning to code looked a lot like this, because you turn into a cartoon when you learn to code. I think you've all been through that process, right? And so when I learned to code, I learned on my own for a few months. And it was hard. It was so hard. It was so frustrating. Because it's you versus the computer, and the computer's always right. You know. And it was so painful. But it was just fun enough and just exciting enough that I kept pushing through and kept pushing through. And then after a few months of that, I decided to enroll into a boot camp called the Flatiron School, based in, well, now they have a few campuses, based in New York City. And when I went to this boot camp, all of a sudden, I had a group of 44 other people who understood the highs and the lows, who understood what it felt like when nothing worked, and how awesome it was when things finally clicked. And having that community was such an important part in me being able to push through and graduate. And when I graduated, I was so excited. They make you click your heels 3 times in order to become like a full developer. And I was so excited when I graduated, and I thought, yes, finally, I'm here. I have arrived. I can get a job. It's going to be great. But getting to that point, crossing that finish line, for me, cost $11,000 out of pocket. There's no student loans, right, for boot camps. It's an unaccredited institution, technically. And many months without a salary, because this is full-time. And full-time isn't really 40 hours. It's more like 60 to 90, depending on how dedicated you are. And so many months without a salary. And here's the thing that's so interesting about a boot camp. That opportunity exists. The information that boot camps teach are out in the world. It's not a question of the resources not being there, but to tap into them, to get one of those seats, costs that. So here's what I knew. I knew that for me, the key to that boot camp experience wasn't exactly the curriculum and the resources, although those were good too. For me, it was all about community. Community was the key, but it was also the thing that was most inaccessible. But don't worry, I'm here. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do something about it. So I decided to build the CodeNewbie Twitter chat. Show of hands if you know what a Twitter chat is. Raise them high, raise them high, raise them high. Raise them high. Really? Okay, don't worry, I'm going to educate you. Don't worry, I got you, no problem. So a Twitter chat is when you use a hashtag. For us, we use the hashtag CodeNewbie. And you pick a time. So for us, it's Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And you pick a topic. So it might be, your favorite coding resources or side projects, or how to learn on the job was one that we did a couple days ago, actually. And the moderator, which is me, would tweet out questions and get people to respond using the hashtag. So you use that hashtag to keep track of the conversation. And it was a really, really great way of joining at a particular time and really being part of one single conversation. So how do you make a Twitter chat on-ramp? Because Twitter chats, especially back in the day, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, were pretty popular. A lot of people had Twitter chats for many, many different topics, technical, non-technical, lots of different things. So how do you make one that's specific and can be used as an on-ramp? Well, there were a couple things that we did. Number one is we had our 3 rules. Rules are awesome. Rules are very important. Our rules were be helpful, be supportive, be nice. And the idea behind having these 3 rules was to say, before you walk in the door, before you enter our living room, you need to know how to behave. And you need to know what kind of behavior will be tolerated here. And you need to know what behavior you can expect. So when you walk in, you know that you're going to get a helpful environment. We've stated that. We've promised you that. It's a public commitment, as well as setting expectations right at the beginning. The other thing that we did, and this is the big one, this is very, very important, we were really, really nice. In fact, we were aggressively nice. We were disgustingly nice. We were so nice that if you're not nice, you'll hate us. And I'm okay with that. Here's the thing about inclusion. When you say the word inclusion, it sounds like you want everybody to be part of the group, but you don't really want everybody to be part of the group, You want to leave out some of the bad apples. You want to leave out the people who are just going to be toxic, right? You kind of want to weed them out. And our way of weeding people out was being disgustingly, aggressively nice. Let me show you how bad it was. This was about 2-3 years ago, I think it was. And it was Wednesday night, it was Twitter chat time. And that day, early in the morning, I had this terrible pain in my right shoulder, this terrible pain, and it was steadily increasing throughout the day. And I thought to myself, oh man, I hope this goes away by the time Twitter chat comes around. 2 minutes before the Twitter chat happens, and it gets so bad, I can't lift my arm anymore. I can't even move my arm. And I'm crying and screaming in pain. And my poor husband, who's right there, by the way, hey husband, how you doing? Just so cute. And so I said to my poor husband, I said, it's Twitter chat time. And he goes, I think we should go to the emergency room. Like, you're crying, you can't move your arm. That sounds like a problem. Maybe we should address that. And I said, no, it's time for the Twitter chat. And so I said, I'm going to dictate, and you are going to type. It's going to be great. It's going to work out. And the thing about our Twitter account, if you look at it's interesting. If you look at our CodeNewbie Twitter account versus my personal one, it's very different personalities. The CodeNewbie Twitter account is full of exclamation points and hearts and emojis, and we celebrate you to the point of exhaustion. I mean, we want you to feel like you were the most magical human being that ever existed. We want you to feel super, super special. And I didn't see it in that way until I had to tell my husband what to tweet. And so he'd tweet something, and I'd go, there's not enough exclamation points. We need a minimum of 3 exclamation points. That's how I sound when I tweet. That's the voice that comes out. And I said, minimum 3 exclamation points. There's not enough heart emojis. Why aren't there more heart emojis? And Emily will tweet and say, I made my first pull request. And I'm like, congratulate Emily. It was intense. It was very. And there comes a time in your life when you find yourself screaming emojis at the person you love, that you realize how seriously you take the work that you do, the community work that you do. But it's helped people who don't have that, who don't feel the need to be aggressively nice. It repels them. It actually does. We're a little too much. We're doing too much. And that is fine. And the other thing it does, it attracts people who need that. The people who want to be aggressively nice, the people who want to shower you with compliments. They want to hang out with us. And in doing so, you end up with this really warm community of people who are super supportive and really, really kind. So, because of this chat, it's going really, really well. People, you can't really read it, but trust me, it's nice things. And this Twitter chat serves as an amazing on-ramp. People are finding mentors. They're hearing about books they never heard of before. People have gotten jobs through the Twitter chats. It's been a really great way to connect the world they were coming from, which is usually a non-technical place, and helping them get to this new world of being, in our case, a developer, being technical. Now, once the chat started picking up, I started to get some messages, started to get some DMs from people who said, man, this is really great. I love what you're doing. I'd love to join, but I'm not in your time zone. Where you are, it's at the time of the chat. For me, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, or it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting the kids ready for school. I want to participate, but I can't. What can you do? And that's when I learned that chat organizers and technical folks have another thing in common. We both hate time zones. Time zones are horrible, and they continue to be horrible. And this is a really tricky problem because I can't be awake at all hours, right? I can't have a chat for every single time zone. I do have a job. So how do you solve for this? Well, we learned this lesson and we iterated by doing another chat, a morning chat. We do chats on Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And that one's more of a coding check-in. It's an opportunity for you to be accountable to us, to yourself, and say, hey, this is what I did last week. This is what I'm going to do this week. And it's been a nice alternative for people who can't make the evening chats. But here's the thing. If those people hadn't spoken up, if they hadn't raised their hand and said, hey, this is great, but it doesn't work for me, we would not have Sunday morning chats. So everything's going great. The chat's going amazingly. But Twitter's not a great place to have a long conversation. You can try, but you'll probably end up just pissed. But it's a great place to meet a lot of people in a very short amount of time, to have a lot of different conversations in a short amount of time. It's efficient, but it's not a great way of digging deeper. So I started to think about a different medium. What's a better medium for exploring? And my first job out of college was actually working at NPR, and I thought podcasts. Podcasts are a really great medium to just focus on one person, one topic, one journey, and to really dig in and dig deep. But when I looked at the landscape of podcasts, specifically technical podcasts, this is what I learned. There's lots of technical content out there, but there are few technical stories. And the thing about technical content is there's tons of stuff. If you're already a developer, no matter what language you work in, there's stuff for you. And if you know that context a bit, it's hugely valuable. But if you're just getting started, a lot of those conversations are just too technical. They're a little bit too in the weeds. They're just out of reach. So even though there are amazing resources that exist for my community, for new developers, they're not necessarily accessible. But have no fear, because I am here. I decided to build the CodeNewbie Twitter chat. That was going to be my way of solving that problem. But how do you build a podcast as an on-ramp? How do you do it with the intention of it making this world, this new world of technology, accessible to more people? Well, there are a few things. One of the things that I knew very, very well about our community is that they need validation, specifically that they belong. In tech, there are generally two dominant narratives of how you become technical. You either learn computer science in school, you have a computer science degree, you went to probably a top 10 university, worked at a Mozilla or a Microsoft or a Google right out of college, and you launched your career and it'll never stop, you're amazing. Or you've been coding since you were 2, right? Those are kind of like the only two options. And the interesting thing is, in interviewing a ton of developers over the years, I realized that most people don't fall into either of these categories. They have their own roadmap, their own journey of how they got there. And so what I wanted to do with this show to make sure this podcast was an on-ramp was to show people from different backgrounds, different places, different experiences, and create a new narrative that says, well, that there is no narrative. That if you want to be here, you can. So this is a snapshot of some of the wonderful people we've had on the show, some amazing people we've had on the show. And what I love about this group of people is they really do come from every different background, different places in the world, different studies. We have people who used to be teachers, who used to be truck drivers, who used to be, I think it was Chad Fowler, who used to be a saxophonist. Whoa, that's awesome. And this has been a really, really important part of making sure that podcast is an on-ramp. The other thing is they need validation that they can do this. That is probably the biggest barrier for new developers. It's not really resources, it's not the education, it's not the job interview. It's believing that they can do it. And this is absolutely huge. And the way that I solve this is actually very subtle. It's nothing big, nothing huge, but I think it's really important. If you listen to a podcast, especially a technical one, more than likely a guest will mention a word, a jargon, buzzword that is technical, that the audience may not know what it is. And the host will usually say something like this: can you define what that word is for people who may not know? And that sounds nice. That sounds thoughtful. But really what you're saying when you phrase it that way is, I know what that word is. You know what that word is. People listening should know what that word is. But there's a couple of them who probably don't know what that word is. Could you help them out? It's a very teeny little jab. It's a little paper cut. It's a little itty-bitty reminder that, ooh, I should know what that is. So what I do in my show is I pretend not to know anything. I'll say, I don't know what that word is. Can you explain that to me? And it's funny because sometimes I'll get texts from friends who listen to the podcast and they'll go, I know you know what that is. And I'm like, yes, I do. But my job is to be the audience. It's to get out of the way and really be them and to be their voice. And in little itty-bitty things like that, you validate that, hey, if I don't know it and I'm the host of this thing, it's totally okay if you don't, and we're going to learn together. And the last thing that I try to focus on is me getting out of the way. This is huge. This is super, super important. For a podcast to really be an on-ramp, I need to kind of be invisible on my own show. And what I do to make sure this happens is I try and focus the interview entirely on the guest. And I'm going to prove this to you. This is, I don't know if you can see it, but that top track, these are the audio files to the podcast. This is episode 111 of Baratunde Thurston, who's a comedian and a technologist. He's awesome, had a really great interview. You should totally check it out. That top track is me, that's my voice. And that bottom in the purple is Baratunde's. And as you can see, I don't really talk a lot. I don't really say a lot. In fact, most of those audio waves aren't even me asking questions. They're me going, mm-hmm, and Those are my two go-to sound effects. That's 90% of the job of an interviewer. Those two. If you nail those two, you got this. You can do this too. But my job is to get out of the way. This show is not about me. It is for you. And I'm going to do another one. This one is Kevin Scott, CTO of Microsoft. And same thing. I think Kevin talks maybe a little bit more than Baratunde. But same thing, right? That top audio track is me. Don't really say much. And Kevin really, really takes the stage. And that's his job. His role is to take up space because he's the one with the resources and the knowledge and the opportunities and the stories that are going to make those resources accessible to my audience. I don't have that. He does. He deserves that stage. Things are going great. Again, amazing, nice tweets, I promise. Things are going great, and the podcast is wonderful. People are telling me they're finding motivation by listening to this. They're using it to help them on really tough days. They're hearing about jobs they've never heard of before, job titles that now they're going to investigate. They're hearing about companies and people they're going to reach out to. And they're really, really helping them get from this old world that they came from to this new world that they're trying to get into. But then this happened. We had another show that we launched called the BCS Podcast about a year ago. We are just recording our fourth season. And the BCS Podcast, the idea behind this is specifically to make computer science education accessible. Now, computer science is pretty tough, and it's really hard to understand it if you don't have a computer science degree. If you're trying to learn that content outside of a degree program, it's tough. There's not like a code academy for computer science, right? There's not a lot of resources and ways to learn that on your own. And so I teamed up with an amazing woman named Vaidehi Joshi, and she, for a year, decided that she didn't have a computer science degree either, and she said that she was going to teach herself. So she did a bunch of research, And she wrote one blog post a week for a year. And it was amazing. It was beautiful. She had lots of graphics. It was gorgeous. And I looked at that and I thought, yes, this would be a great podcast. I'm going to be the student. She's going to be the teacher. I'm going to ask all the questions. She'll have all the answers. And it'll be a great way in short 20-minute episodes of making that education feel more accessible. Show of hands if you've heard of the show Car Talk on NPR. Show of hands, show of hands. Okay. So if you heard of that show, someone recently described the BCS podcast as Car Talk, but for computer science, and that is very accurate. It's just us making a lot of bad puns and jokes and being really just nerdy and geeky and silly, but still teaching you things. So there you go. Now, this show was going great, and I think it was after the first season that I got an email from one of our listeners. And this listener said, "Thank you so, so much for making the show. It was wonderful. It's helped me so much because I'm blind. And a lot of the education out there, a lot of the material for computer science is visual. There's just not a lot of stuff that I can consume. And this is a great way for me to finally understand a lot of the content that I haven't been able to understand so far." And I read that and I thought, oh my goodness, that wasn't my intention. I wasn't thinking about accessibility in that way, but that's great. But what that made me wonder was, who am I leaving out in the fact that I picked podcasting as the medium? What happens if you can't hear? What am I doing for those folks? And that's just something that, until that email, I didn't think about. And it was the first time that I thought of these shows that at this point I've been doing for years through the lens of accessibility. What are we doing to make this more accessible for folks? What we decided to do was we iterated and we did transcripts. So now we transcribe all of our episodes for the CodeNewbie podcast and for the BCS podcast. But here's the thing. If that one listener hadn't spoken up, if he hadn't sent me that email, we would not have transcripts. I didn't think of that. He did. So far, we talked about 3 projects, 3 different on-ramps, the BCS podcast, CodeNewbie podcast, and the CodeNewbie Twitter chat. And all of these are online, which is great, right? More people can join in, more people can take part. We can make that on-ramp bigger and sturdier and wider and have even more people on it, helping them get from one world to another. But the thing is, situations like this, meetups, events like this, conferences like this, are super important. They are a huge part of my career, professionally, personally. They've been an important way for me to meet amazing people, to get job opportunities, to make friends. And so this IRL, right, this in real life component was huge, and it's something that we hadn't addressed. But from all the speaking that I've done and conference attending that I've done, one thing I understood, is that most conferences just aren't great for newbies. They don't serve as on-ramps for them. And the interesting thing about conferences is that technically anybody can go, right? You don't have to apply to go to a conference. As long as you can pay for the ticket and take the days off, then you're there. So it's technically, the fact that it exists is great and is very valuable. But just because it exists doesn't mean that a lot of people can access it. But once again, have no fear, I am here. And I've decided that I'm going to build the conference for new developers. It's going to be called CODELAND. It's going to be amazing. But how do you build a conference as an on-ramp? How do you make that the thing that bridges these two worlds? Well, there are a couple things. Number one, for our community especially, is when you go to a conference, you ideally would like to follow and understand the talks. That seems kind of like a no-brainer, right? An obvious one. But here's the thing about technical conferences. They're really technical. Even the ones that are, the talks that are labeled beginner-friendly or newbie-friendly aren't actually beginner-friendly. They're beginner to this technology-friendly, right? Not beginner to tech-friendly. And those are very different. Because, as you all know, that very first language, tool, framework that you learn, that's the hard one. That's the really tough one. Because at that point, you don't know how to navigate docs yet. You haven't learned that you do need to read the error message. Some of you are still learning that. You don't quite know when it's okay to ask for help. You haven't built up your toolkit, your personal support ecosystem to know how to learn efficiently. You hit a roadblock and you think, oh my goodness, I think I'm just stupid. It's me. I'm the idiot. But once you get that first language, that first framework, that first technology down, the second one is a lot easier. You know that you're going to hit a wall a couple hundred times. That's not you being stupid. That's just the process of learning something technical. So that second time is way easier. But what happens for my community, for new developers, is they'll sit in that talk, they'll hear that one word that throws them off, and they'll go, oh my goodness, I'm never going to get this. And they get overwhelmed, they get frustrated, and they check out. So being able to follow and understand the talks is super important. So what we did to address this is we created these conference booklets. I'm so proud of these booklets. Oh, they're so good. They're about 100 pages. And what I asked all the speakers to do is I said, please send me 2 things. Send me a list of resources so people can learn more about the thing you're talking about. And send me a list of terms and definitions. That way, if I'm a new person, new to that topic, and I'm sitting in the audience and you mention a word that I don't know, I can quickly look it up, read the definition, and follow along and keep up. And it's been an incredibly helpful way of making sure that the content of these talks is accessible to more people. The second thing is that newbies really need to learn why. I think once you get comfortable in being technical, you kind of forget about the why a little bit. You get so excited about the implementation, you get excited about how it works, that you forget about, well, why am I doing it? And where am I doing it? And who uses it? And what are the side effects? And what are the questions I need to answer? And you kind of forget about that world around the technology. But for new developers, that why, that context is huge. A lot of people get into this because they're excited about the ideas they can bring to life. They're excited about the problems in their own lives, in their own neighborhoods, their own communities that they can solve with these technical skills. So to them, that why, that context is super important. Sometimes it's more important than the technical implementation. So to help address this for our conference, I personally work with every single speaker. I think I average about 4 hours per speaker across 2 conferences, about 80 to 100 speakers. And I personally work with people on the outline of their talks, their slides, their actual presentation, to make sure that this why was covered, to make sure that their talks would connect with our audience. And the last thing that we need for our conference to make sure it's a solid on-ramp, and this one is huge, is we need to make it financially accessible. And a lot of conference attendees take this for granted because a lot of us have companies that'll pay for that ticket or pay for that hotel or at least heavily subsidize events like this. But for new developers, we're not there yet. New developers are hoping to have that job with a professional development budget. They're hoping to get to that place where there's an education budget, but they're not there yet. They're still working as waiters, as teachers, as secretaries, hoping to one day be in seats like this. And so for them, going to a conference isn't just about using some vacation days. A lot of times it's taking days off that they won't ever get paid for. It's paying for the conference ticket itself, which can be anywhere from hundreds to thousands of dollars. It's paying for the hotel, because a lot of these conferences are in major cities. And if you're not in a major city, because major cities are very expensive to live in, well, then now you have to pay for 3 nights hotel. You have to pay for a flight to get there. So that conference, that thing that could be an on-ramp, that could be helpful in your career to your professional development, is an investment worth thousands of dollars, literally. That makes it really, really tough for people who are trying to break in, who are trying to go from that old world to this new world. So what we did to help this is we created an opportunity scholarship. And there are lots of conferences that do things like diversity scholarships, and usually it means that you get a free ticket, which is wonderful. That's a very, very great way to lower that barrier. But a lot of times the thing that makes it inaccessible isn't really the ticket. Sometimes the ticket's the cheapest part. It's all that other stuff. So we created an opportunity scholarship that covered any expenses that you need for you to attend the conference. And over the 2 years that we had that fund, we brought about 80 people to that conference for free. So, CodeLand went awesome. It was great. We had people who got jobs at that conference, who heard about new technologies at that conference, who made friends, who got mentors at that conference. And it really became that on-ramp that I hoped it was going to be. But here's the thing about conferences. There's a lot of stuff you can get right, but there are a lot of things you can get wrong. And the thing about getting things wrong at a conference is there's not really much you can do. You know, if you find out the day that it's happening, it's not like you can deploy a new build of a conference. You know, you just kind of sit with it and you take notes and you get through it and you hope you do a better job next time. So here are all the things that I missed. Here are all the things that I learned. Closed captioning, totally did not think about closed captioning that first conference. Shout out to the people who are doing closed captioning at this conference. Did not think of it, didn't consider it. And the only reason that this came up is because someone said, hey, did you think about closed captioning? And I said, nope, I didn't. But thank you for bringing that up. Childcare, another thing that we didn't consider. Didn't think of it until it was kind of too late. Dietary restrictions. Okay, this was a little complicated. So dietary restrictions, I did ask everyone what their restrictions were, okay? I did tell the catering company how to, portion the things and stuff, but I forgot to label things. So no one knew which one was vegan and which one was vegetarian, which was no one knew. So people kept coming up to the volunteers throughout lunch and going, hey, can I eat this? Is this for me? And I thought, I can't believe I missed food labels. Huge. Seems like a minor detail for me, but is huge for the attendees who are looking for that food. And the last one that came up is photography and privacy. Shout out to the privacy policy here with the yellow lanyards. That's awesome. I didn't think of that first conference. And this one is actually really interesting because the way that I found out about this is through a few tweets. This is the first one. This one says, I love this idea for events and conferences. It helps some people feel more comfortable, but it would have helped me attend events at all after I escaped an abusive relationship and was worried about stalking. I wasn't able to go to any events for months. Thanks, She Coding. And this sign says, please do not photograph attendees with this sticker. And it was a little hot pink sticker. And this is so fascinating to me because it's not a problem that I personally have. It's not a problem that people I know in my community, or at least one that I know that they have. It wasn't visible to me. And the only reason I saw this tweet was because of this tweet. This is someone in our community, Hunter Stevens, who has been in our community for a while, and she tweeted directly at us. And she said, CodeNewbies, maybe you all can do something like this for CODELAND. Just a simple yes or no on whether a person wants a sticker at check-in would be super easy. And because she called it out, she raised her hand and she said, hey, did you think about this? If not, you should. That's what brought it to our attention. So if you look at this list, that first year, all the things that I missed, it shows you that even though we had this awesome on-ramp, that ramp was shaky. Not all the lanes were paved, wasn't quite big enough for all the people. It had some issues. There's some work that we can do to make it stronger, sturdier, bigger. But that's okay, because we have next year, CodeLand 2018, where I would fix all the things. Don't worry. And we did. We iterated. We got closed captioning. It was awesome. We had a childcare fund, which was great. We got those food labels for those dietary restrictions. Amazing. And we also got the stickers for the privacy thing. And actually, I'm going to steal the lanyard idea because I think that's a better way of doing that. So next conference, next iteration, we'll do lanyards. Now, here's the thing. All these ideas, all these issues that came up, they did not come from me. I didn't see any of that. Each one of those was someone in our community going, hey, did you think about? And me going, nope. All of these ideas came from other people. And if they hadn't spoken up, we wouldn't have had a better conference. So CodeLand 2018 happens, and at the end of the event, I give my closing remarks, and I say thank you so, so much to all the people who said wonderful, who gave wonderful feedback. It was super, super helpful. Here are all the things we did differently. Here are all the things that we fixed last year. Please let me know what we can fix for the next conference. What did we miss this time? And a couple hours later, after the conference is over, I'm back in my hotel room. I open my laptop, check my inbox. and I see a list of things that I missed that year. Okay, here are some of them. One of the emails I said I got said, "Did you consider doing more environmentally friendly options?" We had like 1,000 water bottles at that con. I know, I'm so sorry. And I'm thinking, you know, as an attendee, water bottles are super convenient. You grab them, you go, you're on your merry way. It's great. Did not consider the environmental impact of that until someone raised their hand and said, "Hey, did you?" No, I didn't. Prayer room. We had a couple attendees who were kind of running around the venue trying to find a private space. And someone noticed that and said, "Hey, next year you should have a prayer room." Didn't think about that. Didn't see that issue myself. That had to come from someone else. This next one is a little interesting. Someone requested low-carb lunch, which I thought was very interesting. So there was one lunch we had called the summer picnic. It was personally my favorite lunch, but that's fine. That's fine. We're not going to talk about that. And this summer picnic was mac and cheese and fried chicken and lots of heavy things. And when you're in a conference and you're in a room like this and you're sitting for many hours and it's a little warm and you just had a lot of pasta and bread, you tend to get a little sleepy. Very understandable. And that's something that I didn't think about. I just thought, I like pasta, right? Like, people like pasta. That's a thing people like. And it didn't occur to me that, oh, you probably want something a little bit lighter, a little bit greener to keep your energy levels up. Didn't see that one. This next one, someone requested bigger seats. She said, "I'm a bigger person. These seats were really uncomfortable. Could you think about that? Do something about that for the future?" And it's really interesting because if you look at this list, it's really tempting, especially as the conference organizer. You know, I have, frankly, a ton of things to do. Putting on a conference is a lot of work. My to-do list is very, very long and won't get any shorter. So when I look at this, it's easy to go, "Can you just eat the pasta? It's fine. You'll be fine. You can get a salad later. It's not a big deal." It's really easy to see these issues as little issues, as issues that how many people are really going to be affected by having pasta, you know? But the thing is, this isn't about the pasta. It's not even about the bigger seats, not about the water bottles. This is about a list of things that I didn't see. These are my blind spots. Now, I got a ton of feedback that night, and I got this one email from a woman who gave some really good constructive feedback. And it was very, very thorough, and I responded, and I said, "Thank you so much for all of your feedback, for all your thoughts. This was awesome." And I said, "You know, you need to go to all the conferences and send them all an email, because you would make all the conferences so much better with your amazing suggestions." And she said, "Oh, I don't do this for everyone. In fact, I've never done this. I did it for you because I know that you'll do something about it." And this reframed that inbox, because that inbox wasn't a list of things that I'd gotten wrong. It was full of people who believed that I was going to fix it. And that's really different. But the thing is, how do they know? How do they know that I'm going to do anything with these suggestions? Because a lot of what they see, a lot of the work that I do is invisible. If you think about what you actually see in a lot of the roles that I talked about, what do you see? You see a couple tweets, you hear me ask some questions on a podcast, and that's kind of it. You don't see the hundreds of emails I sent to potential sponsors hoping to be able to fund this conference. You don't see me lugging hundreds of conference booklets from the printer to my car, hoping it'll fit in a suitcase. You don't see, yeah, I'm excited too, sir, yes. You don't see any of that. A lot of the work that we do as community organizers is completely invisible. It's done in the dark. No one gets to see that. The only thing that you see are these little interactions, these little things that happen over time. There's nothing big to point to. There's no one big announcement or one product that you can look at and say, "You see that? You see that right there? That is proof that she's going to do that." There's nothing there. Because what matters are these small, consistent acts, these little things that you do over time that eventually build trust. This is how we really build those on-ramps. You don't build one big ramp that's perfect. You build one that's a little bit shaky, it's a little messed up, it's a little rinky-dinky. And then you pave it, you add some layers. I don't really know how ramps are built, so just forgive this, where this is going. But you make it better, you make it bigger, you make it stronger. And eventually, hopefully, you have one that includes more and more people, helping more folks get from that one world over to that next. It's constantly going through that loop of understanding and building and listening and iterating over and over again, and that loop never ends. Y'all are product people. You know that loop never ends. There will always be bugs to fix and features to build. And the same thing goes when you're serving people. It never really ends. But no matter how big that problem is, that thing that you're fixing, you have to always go through this loop. So what I want you to think about is, what does your loop look like? What are you understanding and building and listening and iterating on? What are you doing to help make our on-ramps stronger and bigger and better for more people? Being part of a community is amazing. It's wonderful. It feels so good. When you finally make it over to that new world and you find your people, you get that job you've wanted, you understand that concept that's been so difficult for you to grasp, you're able to get those opportunities you've been looking at, you've been eyeing for so long. It is wonderful. And when you do it with a group of people who are supporting you and pushing you along the way, it is even better. But it's up to each one of us. And if you're in this room, I'm kind of assuming that you've made that transition, at least somewhat. You've crossed that ramp a little bit. And I'm hoping that you remember to look back and see how you can bring other people across as well. Because that work never ends. We're always building and fixing and improving. And in fact, when I was a kid, I remember watching my mom run around at every event, every gathering. And she'd always be so tired. She'd always be running around, grabbing a dish, grabbing a food, making sure people were happy. And I would look at her and I would go, oh man, that looks terrible. I don't want to do that. That looks awful. She's so tired all the time. And she would collapse into a chair when everyone left and she'd go, oh, I'm so tired. She would hate me for doing that accent, but it is so accurate. It is spot on. It really is. And I would look at her and I would go, oh, I never want to do that. But when it comes to building community, all I've ever wanted was to be like her. When it comes to making this new world a little less scary, a little more accessible, a little friendlier, all I've ever wanted was to be like my mother. All I want is to make you feel safe and welcome and wanted. Thank you so much.